advisor walk into a bar.
Oh yeah, and then what?
Well, I just had an interesting discussion, with a new opportunity today, and the first comment they were asking about the price and the cost involved in it, and their first response was, "Wow, that's expensive."
Oh, that never happens to me. Everyone says I'm very cheap.
I don't believe you.
No. We're talking about a lawyer and a financial advisor, so absolutely not. We get, wow, that's expensive all the time. And I think I'm quoting you when I say, yeah, expensive, but compared to what?
Yeah, I always find that an interesting one, especially if someone has given us this discussion around, they want to go on a holiday and they want to do this for the kids and they want to do this, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, so you no problem about spending, 15 grand on a 2 week holiday to Queensland, but then their concern is spending 15 grand on some advice that covers a whole range of areas and helps them support to where they want to go. So I always find that comparison always a really interesting one, where it comes back to value. How I kind of look at it. What do you value your time at in a lot of respects? Because expensive is a relative term. It's like buying a car or a bottle of.
Yeah.
Someone wouldn't give a second thought about spending, $50 on a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't give it a second thought. Whereas someone else is like, oh, I don't spend any more than $10.
Yeah.
Anything over that, I think it's expensive.
Yeah.
And they might have come, you could bring the two people from the same family and they do that. That's just it's relative to their level of extent of what they think is expensive versus not.
Yeah, well, some of it's a really deep-seated personal approach to life. I mean, I know I've got a distant relative who lived on a farm and never had much money, and then eventually the farm got rezoned and they sold the farm for a lot of money, and so he was suddenly literally a millionaire. And he was an older fella, and so he went out and bought a second-hand Holden straight away, spent 10 grand on it.
And that was a lot.
What? Yeah, and he hates it. He said, "Oh, it doesn't do this, and the air conditioning doesn't work, and all this stuff." And we said, "Well, why don't you just buy a brand new car? You've only got a certain amount of years left of life. I mean, that's true of all of us, but obviously some more than others. But he's just always been very careful with money, and so he remains careful with money. And look, there's a lot to be said for that, but I think the big thing is about you're looking at, well, what's the cost? That's one side of a transaction, and then on the other side of the transaction is what do you get out of it? What's the value? And the point is that they've got to be connected. So a second-hand Holden is got this much value, and hopefully a brand new BMW has that much value, whatever. And so it's just a matter of really, when you say that's expensive, you're really saying, well, I don't see the value. So I think it's about an issue around, well, how do we look at what the value of the transaction is, or the work or the advice or whatever it is, and try and understand better what the value is to the customer, to the client. And sometimes that's hidden. And certainly in my area in law, it's often the value's a little bit invisible, because you might draft a contract, say, and then that transaction might go smoothly. And if you didn't have the document in place, maybe the transaction wouldn't go smoothly, but you don't know because you've got it in place and everything goes smooth, and you think, well, I just spent, 3 or 4 grand on nothing. So really, it's a real education piece around, well, what's the value of legal advice, financial advice, whatever it is? What's the value of whatever it is that you're buying? And how's it priced too? Because I think in our industry, there's lots of different ways of pricing, and that's not really well known. Are you charging by the hour? Are you charging by a fixed fee for a certain amount of work? Are you charging in some sort of value? Does the client has certain goals, and if you achieve those goals, you charge certain amounts or whatever? And you can do any of those.
But how are you guys pricing then? Like that fixed fee, because so much stuff now is driven on a fixed fee basis.
Yeah.
People just don't want to see this. The meter ticking. This is where we find it as well. When you start to, from an engagement point of view, especially on a retainer basis, I don't want to have to ring you and then find that the meter starts every time I pick up the phone.
Yes.
People go, well, then I won't ring you. And you're like, no, that's when you should be ringing me and not leaving it, because then you let it go too far. And all of a sudden. So that's where I look at the value-based discussion as well on an agreed fixed fee. It's like, but we've made the best estimate over that 12-month engagement period, or the project specific. But Ring,
Yeah, so we give our clients the choice, so they can be charged sort of however they like. And actually, we expected that everyone would want fixed fee, and they don't.
yep,
A lot of people say, "Well, my last lawyer charged by the hour, so I want you to charge by the hour." I'm comfortable with that. I understand it. Sometimes they charge by the hour themselves,
yep.
and they say, or sometimes we say, "Why don't we have a monthly? We've worked for you for 12 months. We usually charge you this much per month." And so, why don't we just, rather than charge you by the hour, why don't we just fix that as a certain monthly fee? And they say, "Oh, but what if I don't use you that month?" We say, "Well, we still charge you. That's how it works." And they say, "Oh, well, I don't like that. If I don't ring you, I don't want to pay anything." And you go, "Oh, that's okay." But then obviously, if in a particular month you use us twice as much, you got to pay twice as much. And they say,
Yep.
"Oh, yeah, I'd rather do that." So I'm actually surprised that it's fixed fees and stuff are less popular than I thought they'd be.
What
Obviously,
about
some people do
performance
want them.
fees? Because you could
Well,
you could turn around and have an agreement and draft something or give
yes,
some advice that
yes,
may actually only take you an hour to put together, but it's because of years of experience, or you may have dealt with it in a
oh,
similar
Dave, you're singing
circuit.
from my choir sheet, my hymn book.
Yes, but this is what people misunderstand. I
Yeah,
kind of look at that and go, well, yeah, but that's what it's because we see these transactions regularly that
yes,
occur, or the circumstances that people are in, that it's very easy to sometimes go, oh, that's what you need to do. It's an hour's work, but is that worth, $500 or 5 grand or
yes, yeah.
50
Well,
grand?
it is true that, I mean, in some areas, say in certain types of disputes that I deal with all the time, and I have for many years, that I reckon I can talk to a client on the phone, hear the basics, and within 20 minutes have effectively told them what to do and what their prospects are, in a
Yep.
way that's, I think, extremely helpful, and that they then may be able to go away and settle the dispute themselves, and they
Yep.
might save themselves, 100 grand or whatever the dispute's about. And so there's a lot of value in that. And so I think that is true, that we can rather than charge. But the problem is, in law, we're not allowed to charge a percentage of the outcome, if you like. It's actually illegal for a lawyer to charge. So we can't say, okay, well, if we win your case and you win $100,000, we'll take 10% and we'll take $10,000 or whatever the figure is. Where
Yep.
that's illegal. The most we can ever do is charge an uplift. If we get a successful outcome for someone, you can charge up to 25% more than your normal fee. But you can't actually charge a percentage outcome. So you won't get that from a lawyer. In America, you can, and you probably see that on the American shows, where
Yeah.
there's some
Yep.
very wealthy American lawyers who do that sort of thing. But in Australia, that sort of thing's just not allowed. What you do have in Australia, though, is litigation funding. So you can a litigation fund or a third party can lend you money.
So
to
that's the
lead
way
the
they
case.
get around
That's the way they
that
get around it. In
uplift
fact,
based
I
upon the
used to run a
percentage.
litigation funding company, so I know all about that.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, but I mean, that's only in litigation. It's not going to help you if you need to draft a contract, or it's not going to help you if you're the defendant in a litigation. You're going to get sued. No
Yep.
one's going to lend you the money to run a case where you don't
Potentially gonna
stand to
get.
gain
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So look, there's lots of different ways of charging. The value way, the time way, the fixed way, or whatever. And I think value is really great, but you really need a good relationship between client and lawyer. In any service provider, I think you need a really good relationship, because you really need to understand, well, what is the value from the client's point of view, and how do you
Yep.
measure it in an objective way so that there won't be any issues down the track.
So do you then find that once you may have done some of that transactional work for a client, do they then transition and there's a consistency after a year or two, and they're like, well, paying 30 grand a year over the last 2 years, and we like the work you're doing, we think more transactions will continue to come through, and they'll transfer to an agreed fee, or people tend to stick one way or the other?
That does happen. So they do transition over time. But what our experience is, and is that people effectively just want to pay a reasonable fee for a reasonable outcome, or a reasonable amount of work, or reasonable value. And so
Yep.
if we've been doing work for someone for a couple of years and charging them, say, an average of 30 grand a year, they're happy with that, and they'll just continue with that. It's only really if there was a challenge. Say we had one client who was having a cash flow problem. The business was good, but the cash flow was very tight. And so we, fixed a certain amount per month, so they knew they wouldn't get themselves into trouble, if you like, and
Yep.
it could smooth out their expenses. And then they would be paying less some months and more other months. Sorry, they'd be incurring less or more costs some months than other months, and it'd be evened out because they'd only pay a fixed amount each month. and they were happy with that because of their cash flow issues. So sometimes, if for specific businesses we do it that way. But what we find is, in the end, clients don't care. I don't know if that's what you find, but they go, charge me by the hour, charge me a fixed fee, charge me value. I don't care. Just charge me a reasonable amount. If I'm happy with your work, then I'm happy to pay your fee. Yeah, I'll pay, exactly. And, once they've had we've got a bit of a relationship, we've done work for them before, and they know the kind of what to expect, if you like. And we tell them, whether it's a fixed fee, a value fee, or an outcome-based fee or whatever, they know in advance what it's going to be. So, yes. If they know in advance what it's going to be, and then it is that, then they're happy, or at least that's you've got a good chance of them being happy, right?
If we go back to the traditional financial planning model, and in some respects, people weren't aware of what they were being charged, because a lot of the fees as such
were secret stuff.
Yeah, because a lot of it was then embedded within a particular product, like an insurance policy or an investment account, that the investment person would then pay the advisor. And so sometimes the client didn't realise the extent of the fees that they were being charged. Now that has evolved and is still evolving. Yeah. But for us, we don't do it that way. We charge a straight fee. We agree to what the scope of work is for that year, and then we agree to what that's based upon our experience. We think it's worth 25 grand for the year. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter, because you can have a person that turns up with $1 million of cash. And these are the sorts of examples that we've got. So you can have a scenario: someone receives an inheritance. Yeah. And let's call it $1 million. They may have of debt against their home. Now, some people would say, look, this isn't under the old model. You take a percentage of funds under management. So the $1 million, if I invest that money in the equity market, in the share market, I'll make $10,000 out of that $1 million at 1%. Right. Now, my view on that is that that's not appropriate. The $1 million should go back against the non-deductible debt and repay that, and then reset their structure. And it may only be then, they may only like to borrow $500,000 to invest, but they're not paying any debt on their non-deductible. So the debt that they have is fully tax deductible, but it's only $500,000. Be that we charge them $7,000 or $8,000 for that advice for the year, as an example. That's one situation. So there's an agreed fee. Or you may have someone that has $1 million, and all of a sudden they then it becomes $2 million for whatever reason. They've picked up more cash from somewhere else. But if it's 1%, and I've already invested the $1 million, so there's $10,000 at 1%. If I put another $1 million in, so now it's $2 million. Does that mean I should be getting paid $20,000 for a fee? Yes. Why is that, when the portfolio structure may not be any different? So yes, there's an element where it may vary, but I don't see that it's equivalent to the 1%. But it also, what it does is it draws people to only put a client's investments into an environment that means that they can take a percentage of the investments as a value to receive a revenue stream. So you're not going to say pay off your home loan, which is a great idea, because there's nothing in it for the financial advisor. Correct. Yeah. And this is the real distinction around, and that's why, we're not concerned. If people want to do that, that's great. But the advice fee is the advice fee, irrespective of whether, but I've just paid off my home loan. Yeah, no, but that's a really good thing. Now we restructure about how we can do so, but it's very tax effective debt because it's all tax deductible. But it also then comes into their insurance portfolio structure. It also may come back into some work with a lawyer just to facilitate their estate planning. They need to save up for that lawyer. Need to save up for that bad boy. Well, yeah. Well, see, that's where they end up having to take out the second mortgage. Well, the thing that shocked me was that in your super fund, often you're paying all of these premiums that are coming out of your super fund, and there's some complicated thing, isn't there, about whether it's tax deductible or not if it comes out of the super fund, and you're paying them anyway. So why not stop paying them and start paying the advisor to actually give you some advice? People can just be very, apathetic around their super fund. They're like, look, it comes through. Look, I don't really do much of it. It's like, no, but that is actually your asset. Yeah. That is something that you've worked for, especially if you're an employee. Yeah. A percentage of your income goes to that super fund. Yeah. So you can choose not to engage with it. You don't have to be interested in it. But be aware of where it's going and how it's performing, and if it's doing what you want it to do, because ultimately you will get access to it. So this is where it's always interesting when people go, well, wow, that's expensive again, compared to what? Part of the advice component and paying for that advice that's not attributed to a particular product is we're agnostic to the product. I don't care which one you use. To me, it's much better to put pay your home loan off and then redraw. Now, let's work through what would you like to do? Oh, well, actually, if I've done that, maybe I can finish work a bit sooner, or I can cut back my hours of work. Instead of working 5 days a week, I really like to work, but maybe I can cut back to 4 or 3 days to do something else that I've got an interest in. But then how does that work, putting all of my other things together? So that's where we look at it from a financial advice. A lot of it is not always about should I buy a particular stock on the equity markets or a piece of real estate. It's about what's your lifestyle and how do you utilize the resources you have available to give you the life that you're looking to achieve.
Well, that brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is what's the cost of inaction? If you don't do these things, so say you decide, okay, that's expensive. I don't want that shareholder agreement. I don't want that. I don't want to take an active interest in my super fund, or I don't want that financial advice. Where does that leave you? And maybe you've just saved yourself $5,000 or whatever the price of that bit of advice is. But what's the real cost of that to you in your life and to your business? And certainly, I've got a lot of very successful clients who I think there's a total mismatch between their business success and their life success. Those two things aren't connected, and that they're because they might be saving a few dollars here and there, but they're not getting the right advice, or that they're business partners and they don't have the shareholder agreement. So then when one of them gets sick or gets divorced or whatever, they end up in a dispute with each other, which maybe the $5,000 might have avoided. And sort of like having an insurance policy in place, right? You insure your house. Why wouldn't you insure the most important business relationship in your life, or why wouldn't you get the advice now? And in the scheme of things, if you're talking about businesses that are turning over literally millions of dollars, then $5,000 is looking like a relatively small investment in that protection.
I look at that and go, well, it's an investment in the direction that I want to go in, or for me to become more educated around my personal circumstances, which then enables me to make some other decisions. And so part of it then becomes absolutely there's an opportunity cost. Is that money well invested to get me a better return than if I did it on my own? And the research clearly shows that people that are advised generally will do better. Your behavior, you sell when all of a sudden things go bad, as opposed to, no, this is actually a good time to be adding to something. You know what? Just hold. Like, it's the value that's gone down. You haven't lost anything. It out. Life is
and you've got 10 years to wait, or whatever the horizon is that you guys will know about.
It's just this real balance for people to get a sense of, again, is it a cost or is it an investment?
Yeah, well, I used to, for an interesting story, I used to do seminars on shareholder agreements, tell people to do shareholder agreements, how great they were, very important, blah, blah, blah. And I don't do that anymore. I do seminars on disputes between business owners because if I do a shareholder agreement, I might charge...
That's more lucrative.
$3 or $4, $5,000, depending on the complexity of it, maybe $10,000, right? But that's the most that you'll charge for a shareholder agreement. But I can tell you, for a shareholder dispute, if you can get out of a shareholder dispute for $10,000, you're doing absolutely brilliantly. It's anywhere from sort of 30, $40,000 to get to a kind of a mediation, up to $150,000 if it goes badly. Not just that, but the stress and the upset of dealing with a shareholder agreement is unbelievable. And the business damage, right? The business that's having two partners fighting about the ownership of a business, the business is hardly thriving through that period. And so that the opportunity cost of not spending the 5 and then instead spending the 100 and having years of stress, or at least if you issue a court proceeding in the superior courts, it's going to take you at least 6 months to resolve it if you're lucky, and it could be 18 months, right? So it could be longer. If it goes to appeal, it could be even longer. So, you're taking a pretty serious risk by not spending that little bit of money. But I actually found it was quite a hard sell, if you like, to clients to get the shareholder agreement. But it was an easy sell once they were in a dispute to spend a whole bunch of money. So, and financially for our business, if we're dealing with a dispute, we make a lot more money than dealing with an agreement. And so, by all means, don't sign the shareholder agreement. Just come to me later, mate. It's like it's like going to the dentist, I suppose. You go to the dentist for a bit of a checkup and they clean your teeth and make sure everything's hunky dory instead of going to the dentist or going to the is it a maxillofacial surgeon? Who are the guys who do the serious stuff? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Anyway, or the dentist pulling your teeth out or whatever it is. That's more expensive and much more painful. When you're a little bit of a tune-up occasionally. And I imagine the same for financial advice. I had a little bit of a tune-up occasionally.
Yeah, and it's always that discussion around, well, why should I do it now? It's a bit like, well, when's the right time to plant a tree? Well, today. Like, there's no perfect day, but if you haven't done it in the past, start it now. And it's the same with an insurance policy. Get it in earlier than later, because too many times, I'll self-insure, or look, I'm really healthy. Yeah, but no one knows what potentially can occur. Estate planning is another classic example. I'll just get the one from the post office, a will kit, or I'll just don't worry about it. Like my family won't argue over it. Really?
Right. Yeah.
So again, you can not do that. That's no problem. And you and I both would know that if even if you don't have a will, you have a will, because one is you direct it, the other one is that the government directs how it's allocated. Yeah. So feel free, like you can direct it, and it's making and discussing and asking people to articulate. Again, it comes back to what's your end objective. Like being clear on where your end objective is, it enables you to put things in place to get to that particular point in time.
And then you should be able to work out what the cost is and what it's worth.
Correct. Correct. And especially when we're dealing with multiple generations as well now. And there are families and individuals that have made substantial amounts of money. But like you gave an example about the farmer. Where does that sort of sit in that process? When you've purchased land and it's grown in value, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I didn't expect that. But what happens with that? People have just made money by owning a piece of real estate that they may have lived in for 30 years, and now they sell it, and now the family's going to argue over it. And the legal fees, without having an estate plan in place, the legal fees will torch a lot of that money.
Yeah, well, I've certainly, in my experience, successful family businesses often have less successful families, as in that they're when maybe dad was a real dictator, and maybe once dad passes away, suddenly there's a sort of a power void, and people can end up in a dispute over their family wealth, when perhaps if they didn't have the wealth, they wouldn't have a dispute, which is a really sad state of affairs, right? Really sad. If you're successful, you've built your life, you've spent your life building this wealth, and then it actually is the cause of family conflict.
Disputes,
I'm one of
people always say,
children.
you've got all this money, life must be easy. Well, there's this crossover point where, yes, it gives you more choices, but there's also an added level of complexity. So how do you kind of manage and deal with that? Which again comes back to what's your end purpose? What is it? What is it that you would like to achieve? And therefore, there's an investment involved to get to that point in time.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I'm one of 7 children, and my mum always wanted us to go into a family business. She's got Italian heritage, wanted to go into a family business together. There's 5 boys and 2 girls. And if we did that, it would have been a disaster. An absolute, we all get on great, but I can tell you, if we were running a business together, it would have just been on like Donkey Kong, right? You can forget it. So, people, wealth or not, we're just trying to work together like that would have been it. We've all got our own careers, our own families, and everyone meets at barbecues and family events and gets on great. But if you tried to force it like that, absolutely. And I can tell you, then you'd be spending a lot on professional advisors getting, governance programs and shareholder agreements and all this stuff, so that we could not kill each other.
Yeah, but again, it comes back to expensive relative to what.
Yes.
Like what are you comparing wow, that's expensive. And again, I think a lot of it comes back to a level of education. People just,
Yeah.
if they've never had a lot of advice, it's something new. And
Yeah.
you know, I like the ideas where we talk with people about it to get an understanding of, you know, the direction they want to go in and how it's
Yeah.
priced. And you
Yeah.
talk your way through that, and you might be able
Yeah.
to, you know, break it down and do some various segments before it, you know, continues. But, you know, again, I think expense is a relative term,
Yeah.
but also the downside is no problem, don't do anything. But 80% of the time, we know that there's going to be some issues around something that will, when it goes pear shaped, yeah, no worries. I'll be there ready to catch the ball,
Yeah.
and we'll make lots
Yeah.
more out of it.
Yeah. Giddy up. Yeah. Well, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Expensive compared to what, I think is a great way of putting it.
Okay. So do you want to finish up on anything in particular?
Look, I'd just say when you're assessing, if you get a quote for some work, you're assessing, you know, whether it's a good idea. By all means, get other quotes, you know, so you can see what else is out there. Whether you're hiring a lawyer or a plumber or whatever, make sure you're comparing like for like,
Yep.
and then think about, well, what are my alternatives? What am I going to do if I don't get this work done? You know, maybe won't. You know, the front hose will keep leaking. You know, does that matter? What's my alternative if I do nothing, and what's the alternative if I hire one of these people, and you know what's the value to me in the long run, and not just now, not today, but in the long run, because often the advice might be a one-off, and then you know that might set you in good stead for the rest of your life. Is it a one-off or is it an ongoing? And if it's ongoing, you know what's the value of that? I think it's just look at the value and compare it with some facts rather than just a kind of a feeling. It's a really extensive sticker shock. You know, people get sticker shock. They see that how much the car is or whatever on the sticker and go, well, that's a lot. But you've got to look at the value behind it.
Ask questions, and there's no such thing as a silly question, and don't be pressured into, you know, progressing if you don't feel comfortable. I do think the obligation sits on, you know, you or I as the advisors to ensure that the person that's asking or requesting the work to be done is comfortable and aware of what they're actually paying for. That's when I look at it, because, you know, both of us are in business for the long haul, not just to make a short term, you know, buck. It's about, you know, we're trying to do the right thing for people long term, because then they keep coming back.
Yep.
Okay.
Good one.
Thank you, Alex. As always, an absolute pleasure. Lots of banter and some
Thanks,
knowledge
Dave.
shared mixed in with it. See you at the next one.
Appreciate it. See you at the next one.